Chapter 3 Jasper's Point of View. It has been 2 weeks since I met Alice in the diner. Alice and I were now in Warren, Philadelphia, and were staying in a hotel during most of the day because the sun was out. We were going to go hunting in Allegheny National Park once the sun set and was far behind the trees. Alice was lying on her stomach on the bed as her right hand flew across the page of a sketchbook, slowly revealing a picture that she had gotten a vision of earlier. I was sitting beside her on the floor as she quickly finished the picture and turned to look at me. I looked at her puzzled expression and then the drawing and recognized the picture immediately. "That is Peter and Charlotte," I told her. Her eyes sparked and she smiled. Then she sat up and held the drawing of the couple in her right hand.
"I get to meet them,"
she said as her voice squeaked with excitement. I chuckled at how excited she was and calmed her down a little bit.
"You are going to take me up to New York tomorrow and we will go visit them,"
she said as she told me about the vision she had. "If you would like to meet them, of course. I can check us out later tonight and we can start heading their way," I told her.
"Thank you,"
she squealed excitedly. She was always so happy and it always rubbed off on me. I smiled at her. Then she hugged me and I wrapped my arms around her gently. I pulled away after a few moments and I could feel her slight disappointment. I had only known her for 2 weeks and it didn't feel right to touch her that way. That was how I was, a Southern gentleman, as everyone called it. Alice did understand slightly, but I knew that it was harder for her to understand it all because she didn't remember her human life. Alice and I knew we both loved each other very much. I know I had these feelings for her. I didn't show it physically and she silently accepted that. We could feel it off of the other easily, and that is what we used to tell one another how much we cared. Our bond was remarkable for only 2 weeks and it surprised me because I had never had a relationship with anyone over many years and I had received it the day I met her. Alice got off the bed and glided over to the bag that was by her backpack. Alice had insisted on shopping yesterday and I of course said yes, but I had no idea what I was getting into. She loved to shop. She could do that all day. She made it easy though and looked ahead so she could find what she was looking for. She even picked out an outfit for me, well, 2 actually. She picked out one that she liked on me and I picked out one for myself. She grabbed the bag and went into the bathroom to change clothes. She was in there for all of 30 seconds and came out and looked in the mirror.
"What do you think?"
He turned away from the mirror and glanced at me doubtfully. She was wearing a spaghetti strap dress that was pink, red, and white. The fabric ended at her tiny knees and it hugged her body perfectly. The skirt part of the dress puffed out slightly and had a white strip lining the bottom. "I think you look amazing," I answered her with a smile and a nod. She smiled and turned back to look in the mirror. Then she walked over to the bed once again and sat so her legs were crossed and the bottom of the dress made a small circle around her.
"What are they like?"
she asked me suddenly as she looked in my direction. "I had visited with them the day before I met you. They live in New York at the moment but are planning on moving very soon because there are too many other vampires living in that area and there are always problems with them. As the population goes up, more vampires show up there as well. They live in a small town outside of the big city and far away from the humans' homes, which lessens the chance of them seeing the others," I told her. "Peter has light blonde hair and has burgundy eyes. He is about my height and had no special abilities. Charlotte is his mate and she is about your height and has blonde hair as well. They met when I was with Maria. Those two have helped me a lot," I murmured.
"I have seen that,"
she whispered.
"You have been through a lot,"
she added quietly. The sun was now down and I stood up in one quick movement and started walking towards the door. "I am going to check us out," I told her and she nodded quickly. I went up to the desk and there was a man standing there. He smiled politely. "How may I help you?" he asked. "I just need to check out," I replied as I handed him my card. He took it and returned it in about 37 seconds. He handed me a receipt and smiled once again. "Thank you for choosing us. Have a nice evening," he told me as I started to walk away from the counter. I entered the room once more and saw Alice ready to go. She smiled and picked up her tote and backpack. I held the door for her and she walked through the door and into the hall. I was at her side and she took my hand and we left the hotel. We reached the trees after a 15-minute human-paced walk and started to run at vampire speed in the direction of New York. Alice knew exactly where to go, so we matched each other's pace as we ran towards our destination. After about 3 hours of continuous running, we crossed over into New York. It was now 11:10. We continued running for about 10 more minutes, then Alice stopped. She spun around and looked around her and then turned back to me. "Oh," I heard her faintly whisper. I felt a trace of fear come off of her. "What's wrong? What did you see, Alice?" I asked her as she stayed completely still. Then she looked up at me.
"Vampires, 4 of them, all male. They know we are here, and if we keep going in the direction we are now it will be worse. They know we are here though. They have been following us for about 3 minutes now," she murmured.
We both heard something and our eyes flickered in front of us. Quickly nearing us at an inhuman speed were 4 vampires. Then Alice turned behind her and I looked as well. I saw the other 2 coming from that direction. Alice gripped my hand and sighed. They were now yards away from us and soon they came to a stop.
"Hello."
Alice asserted herself into the conversation. She smiled brightly and tried showing no fear, but it was evident in her emotions. One of the males looked at her and then his mouth turned into a grin. I didn't like the emotions coming from this guy, so I inched closer to Alice. "Well, hello, little lady," he answered her as the other one stared her down. The other 2 came to face us as well and they were looking at her as well. One of the men snorted impatiently and stepped forward. This made me step closer to Alice. "Let's just cut to the chase. You are on our hunting ground," he growled.
"We are not here to hunt, we are just passing through,"
Alice told him quietly with a hint of annoyance in her voice. The man speaking picked up on it as well and raised his eyebrows at her. "Well, I suggest that you turn around and go back the way you came or someone will get hurt," he said to her as he glared at her. "Come on, man. We could have some fun with her," one of the men said behind him as he pounded his fist with the other 2 and 2 cracks filled the air. Alice stepped back into me, seeing what they meant, and held my hand. I gripped one hand on the side of her waist gently but protectively as I glared at the 4 of them. The man saw this immediately and grinned as he stepped forward. He grabbed her free hand and pulled her towards himself, seeming to enjoy this. "Get your hands off her," I growled as I pushed him away with force, so he staggered backwards. He was on his feet and pulling on Alice once more. In a matter of milliseconds another decided to join in as the other 2 stood by and watched. I drew Alice towards me and stepped back. "We will leave now," I told him as I gripped Alice tighter. Then the 2 men stepped forward and shook their heads. "She can stay with us," one of them said. I noticed that 2 of the men walked behind us. Then I felt my hands being yanked away from where they stood and she was pulled backwards. I growled and spun around. Then 2 sets of hands grabbed both of my arms. I turned slightly and kicked one of them and yanked my arms away. I turned to see that they had Alice pinned and one of the men was on top of her. She had her head turned so it looked like she was looking far into the distance. I quickly was there and pulled the man off of her, and she tried to stand up quickly only to be held in place by the other one with her. She kicked him suddenly with a little force so he had to catch his balance. She got up and was at my side once more. I grabbed her firmly and wrapped my arms around her so she wouldn't be able to be yanked away again and faced them. "We will be leaving and you will leave her alone," I hissed quietly. With that, I turned with her still in my arms and walked quickly away. I let go of Alice slightly and we started to run. I knew they were following and so did Alice. We kept quiet until we heard him turn off into another direction. Alice slowed until we were both walking at a fast human pace.
"We need to watch out for them, they are trackers,"
she whispered quietly as she looked behind her.
"I see them following us, but it is kind of blurry so it may or may not happen,"
she murmured. I nodded. I didn't speak because I was angry and I didn't want her to notice. The emotions coming off of them that were directed towards her were awful and I would have a hard time controlling myself if I saw them again. Apparently she noticed. She stopped and looked up at me. She took my hand and brought it up so I could see our linked hands but not past my chest.
"Don't worry about them, it's over now,"
she murmured. She leaned against me to where her head was rested on my chest and she brought her free hand around me. I placed my free hand against the small of her back softly. You didn't feel what they were feeling towards you. I did, and it wasn't very polite, I said to her.
Jasper, not everyone is a Southern gentleman, and still they don't care.
She said.
Not everyone is like you.
She added. I let go of her and stepped back a little so I was just holding her hand. She sat down on the ground and I sat across from her with my back against a tree. I know, I answered honestly. She scooted so she sat right next to me and she leaned against my side. She sighed aloud as I did on the inside. Whenever there was physical contact between the two of us, I would feel like I had been shocked. It was a great feeling. She moved again and this time she was in my lap. I was tingling inside and I loved the feel of her hand as it moved an inch on my hand. I wrapped my arms around her stomach and breathed out, tickling her ear. Then I came back to reality. Alice, I can't, I said to her as I moved my hands off of her and moved my head away from her neck. She jumped at me saying that and turned around with shock on her face. She quickly changed her expression so she didn't look disappointed, but I knew she did. Alice, you know I love you, but... I stopped looking for the right words.
What?
She asked quietly. She got off of my lap and turned to look at me. I can't do this to you. You don't know how wrong you are for me, I said to her quietly. I felt rejection wash over her in strong waves. Not like that, Alice. You chose me out of all people and I don't deserve this, I murmured.
Yes you do, and I deserve and want you.
She replied.
I wouldn't want it any other way.
She whispered as she looked into my eyes. I sighed. This was not a fight that I was going to win, so I just dropped it. I was glad that she chose me. I love her so much. She stood up then started walking.
I am ready to meet Peter and Charlotte, let's go.
She said as she twirled happily in front of me. I came up to her side and twined hands with her. She couldn't wait to meet some of my past.